Back in the early 70s, Mattel made an organ for the home market that was called the Optigan, and they had several models, as you can see here. And the claim to fame of the Optigan was that it did not produce sounds electronically. It played back real recordings of real instruments, much in the same way Mellotron did with using magnetic tape technology. They did the same thing, but they used discs, optical discs, like similar to the one I have on this machine down here. And back in 1971, this was pretty high tech, and the machines, unfortunately, never went very far. They weren't a financial success, and Mattel sold their interest to another organ company who ran it into the ground, essentially. And then a fellow named David Van Koevering from Moog Synthesizers decided that he could use the technology and make a pro instrument to go up against the Mellotron, and that was called an Orchestron, and I have a picture of one in our brochure. So the Vako Orchestron had only 37 notes compared to the 57 tracks of the original Optigan, but it was sold to a lot of the progressive rock bands during the 70s. Kraftwerk got one, Jethro Tull had one, Patrick Moraz of Yes had one and used it on Relayer, and a few other bands. But it was, well remembered and well beloved by artists who recorded in the 80s and 90s and even up to today. Adele used Orchestron on her latest album, and Mark Mothersbaugh has used Optigan, and Tom Waits has used Optigan, so a lot of pros, and you hear it all the time. People who own Optigan discs can from time to time hear their material being used on advertisements and car commercials and TV spots and that sort of thing. So I've been making new discs for the old machines for the past 10 years and selling them with P. Hicks through Optigan.com. And P. Hicks was lucky enough to get the original master tapes that Mattel made back in the early 70s, and they only released a fraction of the material onto Optigan discs. So the idea is now that we can make new ones, we'll be releasing more and more of the original material. Plus, we've been getting artists into the studio to record and make new ones. And so, since we've been making all these discs, we decided to make a new player for it called the Panoptigon that takes advantage of modern technology, including MIDI and some computer control. It has a DSP-FX sidechain, but it is truly an analog machine in that the sounds are produced in the same way the Optigan did, by shining light through the disc and picking up the signals with photodiodes and turning that into an electrical signal that gets amplified and routed to the outputs. It's 57, actually 60 note polyphonic, completely polyphonic. You can play all the notes at the same time, and there's no problem with doing that. And we're thinking about making a 60 note disc because there were a few discs made back in the day. One of them was made by a talent maker that had actual 60 notes on it. So we wanted to, try to achieve compatibility with all the legacy formats. But I'll do a quick demo. Right now I have, on this machine, I have a disc that's called Vibroscape, and this is one we did with an artist. I don't even exactly remember his name. Mark Greenberg, who played vibraphones and actually did some kind of interesting things using a rosin bow on some of the vibraphone notes. So it's kind of hard to see. It's easier to hold it up against something white, but you can see that an Optigan disc consists of a bunch of circular tracks, and in essence they are waveforms, much like was used on like 16 millimeter projector sound film, and except these curve around in a circle and they're sound loops. And so what we do is we figured out a way to make the new discs actually using a process of creating a digital image and sending it to a photo lab that has a precision photo plotter. They can do up to 16,000 dots per inch, so it's extremely high res. And so our disc sounds a lot better than the original Optigan disc. Plus, we master the sounds using an audio workstation, so we're able to get the loop joints to be perfect without any thumps or clicks. fun thing you can do with an Optigan disc is, in the Panoptigon, is you can use the pitch bend wheel to change the speed. I'm going up an octave in this case, or you can go down an octave. You can also add modulation, and the modulation is actually synced to do 12 vibrato cycles per revolution. So if you speed up the disc, it speeds up the vibrato, and if you slow down the disc, it slows it down. And that's necessary because sometimes the instruments have their own vibrato and you want to kind of link and lock it in with it. So you can do that because we've added strobe lines to our disc, and the computer reads the strobe lines and knows how fast to drive the disc and knows how to apply modulation to it. Another mode we have is called manual, which is kind of simulates the original tempo wheel on an Optigan, or there was a pitch wheel on an Orchestron that did this, so you can play sounds and pitch it way down, or you can go really fast, and basically you can discover a whole range of weird sounds from the same disc just by manipulating it with speed, you know. Plus, the other cool thing you can do is we have forward and reverse buttons on the front of the Panoptigan, but you can also, we've assigned a key to the same thing, so you can do kind of scratching effects if you want. And you can stop and start it too. So lots of fun to be had. Additionally, we've added some signal processing. This is like a ping pong echo effect. Also have different types of reverb, phasing and flanging, and a chorus. And these other knobs control different parameters for each effect, like the amount of feedback on echo, and for reverb, kind of the dwell or the tail end of the reverb. So basically it's a toy to play with sound, and it's an idea generator. Plus, you can do really cool things with the discs themselves, and the nature of the sound is, some people call it kind of haunting, so if you like that kind of the mellotron sound or old kind of tape recording sounds, this can simulate that. Let's say you're coming up to an Optigan and you just want to get started making music. So the first thing is you turn it on. There are fans, you may notice right there. The disc is actually floating on air, and so it keeps it from rubbing against things. The original discs actually sat on a flocked surface and would just rub against that, which eventually could kind of cloud and scratch the surface. So we wanted to kind of take care of that situation by elevating the disc, and there was a fan of Optigan.com that actually suggested this to me. So I gave it a try, and it works pretty good. So you put the disc on by locating it over the spindle, and then there's a weight that keeps it from floating away and allows it to grip the center hub. And right now I'm starting out in manual mode because that's the most universal mode. Any disc will play in manual mode, including the original Optigan and Orchestron disc. So you hit the start button to get it going, and then it should play right away. If it doesn't play right away, be sure you're on the right MIDI channel, and then you have the Optigan. In this case, it's position 2 for Optigan discs. And it's just a matter of playing it. And if you get tired of manual mode, we have a mode called servo. So this only works with our newer discs that have the strobe lines. We put little strobe lines, and there's a certain number of them depending upon the speed of the disc. And what the servo does is it has a phase lock loop that reads the speed of how the strobe lines go past a sensor, and it locks it in sync with a reference. And the reference is 128 hertz reference. And right now this is playing at concert pitch. The fun thing about servo is it's a little bit jittery, so it kind of makes it sound like you're listening to an old tape recording. And the other fun thing about servo is that when you're playing it, you can interact with it by touching the weight, for instance, and it's always trying to correct it back to concert pitch, so it overshoots. I have it underdamped slightly, and people who know phase lock loops will know what that means. but you can interact with it, and it kind of does kind of wobbly, pitch bendy, boingy things with your sound. And so then the last mode is called CompuDrive. If I enter CompuDrive with it stopped, what CompuDrive does is it will scan the strobe lines and come up with a count, and then it finds the very start of the loop of the disc and parks it. And you see the little red light showing up. That means it's right at the downbeat. And all Optigan discs, well, most Optigan discs have these little windows for a metronome that lights up the light on the beat. And then the downbeat always had some red film that would let you know you're on the downbeat at the very beginning of the loop. So once you're there, playing any key or even hitting the sustain pedal will start the disc moving. And there's a little bit of a wow when it starts up because it's a mechanical system, but that's part of the fun, you know. But if you don't want the wow, you just hit the sustain pedal, it starts playing, and there you go. The other way to enter CompuDrive is if you're in servo or manual and you just hit CompuDrive, it still does the scanning format, but it doesn't park it at the beginning of the loop. It just merely slows it down to the right speed and you're off and running. And then refer to the previous demonstration for all the things you can do with the transpose and pitch bend, and all of that happens in CompuDrive. You can't transpose in servo or manual, but once you're in CompuDrive, yeah, you can do the transpose, the pitch bend. This has aftertouch, so you can hold down notes and it'll give it modulation. And or you can use the modulation wheel. So that's basically it. There is one advanced feature for the high rollers. If you have a lot of money and you want to buy 2 Panoptigons, you can link them together with a little cable, and that allows you to drive a second one from the first one. So if I were to put it in manual and change the pitch, the other one would follow exactly after it. So then you can do nice flanging effects and synchronization effects. I work for Quilter Labs. I'm one of the principals, and I worked at QSC for 20 years. And Pat always wanted to start kind of restart the guitar company in retirement. So technically Pat's retired, but so he's pursuing kind of his first love, which was guitar amps, and I joined him with Chris Parks to start the company. But we always intended to be able to do kind of other fun things. That's why we called it Quilter Labs, is so we could explore not just guitar amps and guitar related devices, but also a bunch of other things. I've got a lot of other ideas of things I want to do too. We're exploring different types of interfaces for instruments. So, stay tuned. We'll have more stuff coming at future NAMMs and, in between NAMMs as well.